It is finally time. You've clicked on this video because you are ready at last to hear about Reanimator Kylo, my favorite Star Wars Unlimited deck. I've been playing this deck since Shadows of the Galaxy released. I have refined it over time, and this deck is now at the point where I am able to pretty consistently go undefeated at locals with this thing. It can beat aggro, it can beat control, and it can beat mid-range. And that's very surprising because a lot of people have taken this leader and put him into this aggro-only box. And that's kind of unfortunate because I don't think that is exactly the only thing that Kylo Ren is able to do. And I've been able to impress a lot of people with this deck list and its ability to take on a lot of the meta and still perform very well while having some extremely powerful tricks that it can do with early plays of things like Palpatine and Vader. Now, I'm not going to tell you that this is the top tier deck that you need to take to the planetary qualifiers and you'll crush everybody and you'll easily win them. This deck is not very forgiving. This deck has a lot of lines of play that are a little less obvious, and it goes down on resources itself to put itself in a better position, which is not the ideal thing. It just is not going to be as comfy to get wins with as other decks in the metagame, and it's going to require a decent amount of experience, I think. But my goal in this video today is to give you everything I've learned as I built and refined the Reanimator Kylo deck, and hopefully you can pick this up, give it a try, feel it out, and see if it's the deck for you and if you're able to perform with it as well. This deck is not only my favorite Star Wars Unlimited deck, it might be one of my favorite decks in any TCG of all time. It is so fun to play, it is so nuanced, it is so focused on sequencing and making really good choices with your cards, so it's very rewarding to play as well. I'm going to be gushing in this video, so you better get ready for that. Strap in, let's jump into my deck profile for Reanimator Kylo Ren.
What could you give me?
Everything.
What's up, everyone? It's Dan from Main Deck, and welcome at last to my Reanimator Kylo deck profile. We're going to be talking a lot in this one, so let's just jump right into things and pull the deck list up here for you. Reanimator Kylo is a deck that I had wanted to play ever since the reveal of Palpatine's return, and I have worked and iterated on this deck, gone through several different versions of it, focusing on different things until I settled on the version here that you see before you that I am very, very happy with. There are a few card choices, a few slots in here that we'll talk about towards the end because they're at the end of the list that are definitely more flex slots. There is a little bit of room for you to toy with this list and find things you like a little more. But there are also a lot of things in this list that I think are extremely crucial to the list working, and we'll go ahead and point those out as we go. This list is going to be a little surprising to some people, and the first thing I'm going to point out right away is that I have absolutely no ramp in here, and that is very, very, very intentional. We'll talk about that as we go, but ultimately, I tried ramp versions of this, and I wasn't vibing it. It was a bad Palpatine deck. I don't want to play a bad Palpatine deck. I want to play the Kylo Reanimator deck, and this is the version that I felt could actually stand up to a lot of the metagame and do some serious work. So, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's start, as we always do, by talking about our leader, Kylo Ren, Rash and Deadly. Kylo Ren is a very fascinating leader that I think too many people have immediately relegated to being an aggro deck leader. And I mean, I don't know if there are a lot of other decks that you want to play him in, but this I think is certainly one of them where it works, and he does not need to be an aggro deck. And an interesting thing about sitting down with people with this deck is they will immediately think you're going to play very, very fast. And that's the exact opposite, which may get them to keep some kind of bad hands, which is kind of fun too. But Kylo Ren has one ability on his front side, which is as an action, you can exhaust him and discard a card from your hand to give a unit +2/+0 for this phase. This ability is the core reason why Kylo Ren is the leader choice in here over someone like Darth Vader. This ability is actually really important because right away I'm going to point out that this sets up Palpatine's Return, which is a card that lets us play a unit from our discard pile, and it costs 6 less. If it's a Force unit, it costs 8 less instead. The core aspect of Kylo Ren that is so important is his ability to, not in every game because you don't always draw it, but in a chunk of games, to be able to play Emperor Palpatine way, way, way earlier. And important to this thing I mentioned about not playing ramp is that by not playing ramp in our deck, but using the Palpatine's Return combo, we are able to spend the first few turns of the game purely playing to the board and controlling the board and preventing our opponent from getting too far ahead in the game. And then we're able to shut the door with Palpatine's Return, which acts as if we had played several ramp cards on its own on that turn. So it's actually a very potent combo. Now, there's a little more to Kylo Ren's ability than just the fact that you discard a card from your hand to set up Palpatine's Return. That's the obvious one, right? You use Kylo Ren, you discard Emperor Palpatine, and then you play Palpatine's Return on turn 5 in order to reanimate him. But this ability to give a unit +2/+0 for this phase, I pinpointed this pretty early on in our podcast that this is not just an ability that is for dealing damage to your opponent's base, but in particular, this allows you to clear thresholds on a lot of units in the game and actually trade favorably, or at least just trade at all with your opponent's units to keep the board clear. Now, this has a big cost to it, which is the fact that it takes an entire action. It's very telegraphed. You get to show exactly which unit you are going to be putting this buff onto, and the opponent has the ability to respond to it. So this is, I mentioned this in the intro, and I'm going to mention this several times. This is where sequencing and your choices are extremely, extremely important in this deck. I would say it's very, very easy to run yourself into the ground and out of options if you use this poorly, and if you use this in a way where your opponent has a very easy answer to it, then you're just going to be running out of value, and that's not going to be good for you either. This ability is not one you use every single turn. Your goal is not to reduce your hand to 0, despite what he says on his deployed unit side. That's not actually what you want to do. You only want to use it sparingly when you either need the buff in order to clear something on the board because you foresee that it'll be better for you if you can get rid of that right now and you're willing to discard a card for it, or if you are going to either set up Palpatine or get free value off of Kylo's TIE Silencer for it. Not just Palpatine, by the way. You can certainly use Ren or Vader as well to set up, but Palpatine is obviously kind of the big swingy one. So we'll talk about all the different interactions with that make that really work out a little better for you as we move on. But before we take too long, let's talk about Kylo's deployed side as well, because I have a lot to say about this too. Kylo deploys when you have 4 or more resources, meaning on turn 3, he's able to deploy. It's the same turn that Sabine can deploy. And he is a 5/4, but hold on to that, with Force and First Order, and he has this unit gets -1/-0 for each card in your hand. Now, Kylo Ren in this deck is not usually a 5/4. You're not actually doing that well in the game if he ends up being a 5/4 when you deploy him, because you're not going to have as easy a time responding to your opponent's threats in the next couple of turns. You really want to be deploying Kylo Ren. Often he's going to be a 1/4 or a 2/4 or a 3/4. Those are probably the most common numbers I think in deployment. And you don't always deploy him on turn 3 either. I will say that I think a good amount of the time you do. What Kylo Ren is here for specifically is to do 2 things. Number 1, he is to put a body on the board that you can more or less freely trade with your opponent's units, just to, again, keep your opponent from getting any sort of foothold in this matchup. You play against aggro decks a lot in Star Wars Unlimited. That's a pretty common thing. Players playing Sabine or Leia or other Kylo decks are going to be committing a lot of power to the board early on. And the last thing they actually want you to do is have a free unit to deploy on turn 3 that just can take out one of their units and then has to be attacked into again in order to get rid of it before he does it a second time. Kylo Ren is great just to be another body, to exist on the board and attack things. And honestly, sometimes you don't flip him because you haven't had a chance to discard a Palpatine yet, and you kind of need to hold on to that. So he's perfect for deploying to the board in order to be able to deal with threats immediately. The longer you wait, the more damage they're able to deal to you, and the closer those aggro decks are to using something like For a Cause, I believe in order to kind of close the game on you at the end of the game. You really can't let aggro decks get a foothold at all. So Kylo Ren is an awesome leader for a control deck, believe it or not. Well, it's this specific version, because he's able to shore up one of your biggest weaknesses, which is having little early game to commit to the board. He can trade with stuff. Don't be afraid to trade him in. If it has 4 attack, then it's probably going to do way too much damage to you anyway. So go ahead, trade that Kylo Ren into it. You'll be better off. Another thing that's kind of interesting, though, is that against those aggro decks, especially the Sabine ones, specifically the Sabine ones, they're trying to play a little dance with you on turn 3. You're playing a deck that's running a lot of control things like Force Choke that are very antithetical to Sabine existing. And what they're always waiting for you to do is sort of project whether or not you're going to Force Choke their Sabine before they can drop it and potentially put a Darksaber on it. And Kylo Ren gives you several more actions that you can do on turn 3, including being able to activate him to pump something and then deploy him and then attack with him to sandbag that play a little bit so you can get your opponent to have to commit to playing that Sabine or passing even while you keep at least one resource up. Now, Kylo being a force unit is huge because you can deploy Kylo and still be able to do something like Force Choke for just one. And we'll talk about that when we look at the curve in this deck and why that's really important, or be able to Force Lightning something on that turn, even Sabine herself, if you need to. So Kylo's Force unit here is actually a pretty useful thing to have, and often he's going to be so small that they're not even going to feel like he's a large threat, and he might just be able to exist a little bit. I've had him exist longer than I would need him to, and I wanted him actually to be back on his leader side so I could discard a card from my hand, but he existed on board because the opponent didn't want to do anything about him. So there are a lot of aspects to the Kylo that you need to really be thinking about, but I think he is very underrated for this style of deck, and he works really well, actually, even when he's at low power. Energy Conversion Lab, of course, is our base choice for this deck, and that is because we're going to attack stuff. And I'll go through with this list everything that you're going to want to ambush, but ECL's ECL. I don't need to talk about it too much. It allows you to ambush with something, and there are so many units in here that it's absolutely insane with that it feels sort of unfair. The 5 health is definitely not enough of a loss to make up for how powerful ECL is. So let's just dig right into the units in this list. Incinerator Trooper is in here as our first 2-drop, and boy, I underrated this guy right away. He performs so well. You would not believe this guy. I will say that one thing that this deck really prefers is being able to go first in the game, because both Incinerator Trooper and MiGs are less exciting when you don't have the initiative on turn 1, because that means you will usually play, your opponent will play something, you'll play them, then they'll take initiative, and on their first action they can take both Incinerator Trooper or MiGs out before they've had a chance to do anything. When you are on the play, these can be extremely powerful units, or when your opponent decides to deploy to space turn 1, these can actually really punish them. Specifically, MiGs can in that scenario, but Incinerator Trooper is great because you want to basically put down Incinerator Trooper anytime your opponent can't immediately kill him and you're able to take initiative pretty cleanly, because that is when he starts to get very threatening. Now, while he's attacking, he deals combat damage before the defender, so he has a shoot first built into him all the time. And the thing that works super well with him is obviously Kylo Ren's ability. Giving him +2/+0 for the phase will mean he's now a 4/2. He's either a 4/2 Sentinel, meaning they're just going to immediately attack into him as soon as you activate that. Because if they don't, he will be able to attack into something and wipe it out before almost anything can deal back to him until you start getting to about turn 4, turn 5. This can be set up easier than you think, to be honest, because it's not that hard for the opponent to underrate him by playing something bigger out. As long as they have nothing in the ground arena and you can start the turn with a ready Incinerator Trooper, you are able to decimate anything they play unless it has more than 5 HP, and then there are other ways still to get around it anyway. More than 4 HP, I should say. Even without using Kylo Ren, though, this 2/2 first strike thing, you can ECL that to take out a threat that your opponent thought they were going to get a little more value with, which doesn't suck at all. That's pretty nice. If that can clear the board so that Incinerator Trooper lasts, that's usually worth it, because then they won't have anything in the ground arena, and next turn you can activate Kylo Ren and kill anything else they deploy before they're able to deal any damage back to it. That's super strong. He's been totally dope. I really love Incinerator Trooper. Migs Mayfield also has been an absolute all-star. Even though they're both 2/2, they're both very fragile. They're easy to kill. The goal is that the opponent won't have too many ways to take care of them, and they will both be able to accrue some advantage. And Migs is very, very good at doing that. The ability to activate Kylo Ren, then deal 2 damage to any unit or base, and then potentially put the buff on Migs so he can trade in. Like, Migs can take out Poe on his own. Migs can take out Poe. You pitch Kylo Ren, a card to Kylo Ren to pump him, deal 2 damage to Poe, and then attack Poe for 4. You do have to trade 2 cards for that, but often for a Poe or something, that's worth doing. You're making decisions like that all the time with this deck. When is it worth me losing extra cards to do this? Both Incinerator Trooper and Migs are basically giving Kylo Ren's an ability a little bit more value. It's turning Kylo Ren's ability to instead once per turn discard a card from your hand. For Incinerator Trooper, it's like you got an open fire. For Migs, it's kind of like you got an open fire, but you can spread the damage. It's slightly better, slightly worse, depending on the scenario. But both of those are just making Kylo Ren into a leader that, if you read that ability on a leader, if you read a leader that said, rest this discarded card from your hand, exhaust this discarded card from your hand, you get to deal 4 damage to something in play or something, that you would probably say that is a totally absurd control leader. So we're just trying to build a deck that plays into that ability and makes it into more of a control deck. And these two do a really good job. But again, when you don't have the initiative on turn 1, they're a lot harder to play. You have to be very careful with that. It might be better just to pass, because just losing the Migs is not really worth it. Fifth Brother is our first 3-drop in this deck, and I love Fifth Brother. He is super, super good, especially if your opponents are trying to play decks like Kira, any shield-based deck, Rey decks, and Luke decks. Fifth Brother is so good at dealing with shields. He's absolutely nuts for that. But really, his big thing here is he can pump out damage. He's a 3-drop that you can ECL to deal 4 to something, and he will sometimes survive depending on the unit. And he also can just get really, really big, and Kylo can make him even bigger if you need him to be that way. But he's also a force unit, so he's going to set up your force chokes and your force lightnings when you can't get Kylo. Yeah, he's really solid all around. General Veers I have in here is the 1-of. He's the spicy 1-of to find with Vader. That's purely what he's there for. You don't usually want to play him. I mean, occasionally he's nice because he can pump Fifth Brother up. He can pump up the Dark Trooper. But really, he's there. You don't really want to draw him. If you draw him early, you just kind of resource him a lot of the time. You want him to be in the deck to be found with Vader's really, really deep dig. And even as a 1-of, it happens more often than not. So there are a lot of Imperial units in the deck. He works pretty well at making Vader bigger and making them bigger, and he's pretty sweet as a 1-of. Phase 3 Dark Trooper, absolutely cracked card. This card is really, really good. 3 cost, 3/3 with Sentinel, and when combat damage is dealt to him, you get an experience token on him, experience counter on him. He is extremely good to ECL again. There are a lot of 2/3 threats in the game that you just want to deal with, things like Sabine Wren. Sabine ECLing Dark Trooper into Sabine Wren is a play I do almost automatically when I see it on the board, because then you not only get rid of the Sabine, you now have a 4/4 that they're going to have to crash something into, or it's going to take out their Sabine, or you know, mostly take out their Sabine or something, or you can pump him with Kylo Ren to make him 6, so he definitely can take out Sabine. He's a Sentinel, so pumping Sentinels with Kylo Ren, again, you can turn him into a 6/4 Sentinel, and then they're going to have to do something about that. So that is not a bad play at all. Dark Trooper is awesome. He holds down the fort, and he's a great card to find with Darth Vader as well. You'll notice here we have no 4-drops in ground, which is fine. There aren't any that I think are really worth playing in this deck that really make their value up. And instead, what we often do on that turn 4, again, we're thinking about against like other aggro matchups, you really just want to be playing a 3-drop and then having 1 resource up to play Force Choke with. That's kind of ideal. You also can do things like Timely Intervention and Incinerator Trooper on turn 3, which is sometimes extremely good too. You can smuggle that Timely Intervention and still play the Incinerator Trooper. You can Timely out of hand to play Fifth Brother or Dark Trooper. That can be super good too. So we have like lots of things we can do. Plus, when the opponent's playing the space, Interceptor is your turn 3 play instead. So we have lots of things we can do on turn 3, so it doesn't really matter that we don't have any 4-drops in the ground. And when we move on to our 5-drops, we have 2 Rook, and Rook is still an absolute beast, still a unit, super good with Timely Intervention now, because it used to be in set 1, we just had ECL 1 time per game, and we could choose 1 thing to give an ambush to, but now that we have Timely Intervention, we can play a bunch of units in this deck that are very, very good when they are ambushed. So Incinerator Trooper, Phase 3 Dark Trooper, Rook, Fifth Brother, and then Kylo Ren and beyond that are all super, super good units to be able to ambush with. So I don't feel bad at all, and I've loved having Rook because there are lots of big, scary threats. Rook is another way where if you have a Rook in play, Crate Dragon is almost unplayable. If the opponent's playing a Han Solo Crate Dragon deck, they can't really do anything because they have to get rid of the Rook first, because the Rook will just trade with the Crate Dragon all day, potentially not even trade, just kill it and then exist still. So I do love the 2 of Rook. He's been really, really excellent. And you'll notice in this deck too, I have a number of ways to deal with Crate Dragon. We're not getting Crate Dragon here. That's not the deck you have to worry about when you're playing this, and that is awesome for me. Kylo Ren 6-drop Kylo Ren legendary. I think this card was maybe underrated right away. I didn't see enough people talking about this guy. And I understand. He is a 6-drop 6/7 that just makes something bigger, but he makes himself bigger. And as a 6-drop, he can be played with ECL. And as an 8-power attacker with ECL, he is going to delete all but like 2 leaders in the game the turn that he comes down. Plus almost any unit. He can almost kill a Reinforcement Walker, and if they're playing Young Han to play Reinforcement Walker, he can kill a Reinforcement Walker. And otherwise, you can pump him with Kylo Ren, you can get extra damage with MIGs, you can finish off with Incinerator Trooper. 6/7 is such a powerful stat line. It kills so many things, and he lives from a lot of things. We all know that from Vader, how good that can be. But 8/7 is just on another level. So I have been a huge fan of Kylo Ren, and not just that, he can just push damage like nobody's business. He's effectively just about a 3-turn clock against anyone else playing Energy Conversion Lab if he just decides to attack their face. So sometimes you're going to play these decks that are trying to go a little bit later, and you're just going to play a Kylo Ren and go, well, you better have the answer to this guy because he's going to clock you real fast. So I've been a big fan of Kylo Ren. I'm happy to discard him because you can reanimate him, and that's totally fine. But he's great to ECL into Timely Intervention with. Darth Vader, I don't know if I need to say a lot about Darth Vader. He is going to put stuff on the board. He's going to take stuff off the board. He's going to usually take 2 things to kill, and potentially 3 because he'll put a Dark Trooper into play. Veers makes him a 6/8, which is just absurd. Kylo Ren shores up his 5 attack to make it 7, so he trades with any other major threat in the game on the ground, basically. He's Vader. He's Vader. If you don't have Vaders, you should try and get him. The price is going to probably go down even more when the second run of Spark of the Rebellion hits. He's already gone down a chunk and is totally, easier, still expensive, but easier to get. But, hopefully in that reprint, he's super easy to get a hold of because, yeah, he's good. Maul's not as good as Vader, and you really want Vader here. Emperor Palpatine is finally our 8-drop here. Emperor Palpatine is the reason that you play Palpatine's Return, or he's the card you play with Palpatine's Return specifically because it's absolutely cracked. He's an 8-drop, which means Palpatine's Return can 8-drop Force unit, so Palpatine's Return plays him for free from your discard pile. He's the card you want to have in your opening hand to pitch to Kylo Ren all the time, that or the TIE Silencer. And when he drops, he usually takes over the game. If it's on turn 5, it's for a lot of decks, that's the death knell. The thing that I love about this deck is it plays a legitimate game, a legitimate control game where it's just going to answer stuff in play all the time. It's going to spend its whole game just answering things every turn after turn. You'll annoy people. People will get annoyed with you because every single turn you just go kill that, kill that, kill that, kill that. And Palpatine will come down and he's just not even going to feel fair. This deck plays a legitimate game, but occasionally spikes games really hard. When you draw Palpatine's Return and the Palpatine and you have your pitch to Kylo Ren, which isn't too hard to do, then when you get to play that Palpatine Return turn 5, the opponent is often going to be really on the back foot after that. They're going to lose their whole board, usually, and then they're still going to have to deal with the 6/6 Overwhelm, which can be an 8/6 Overwhelm, which is kind of cool too. And then when they deal with him, you might just have another Palpatine's Return. It can come back, or it has been 2 turns, so you just play another Palpatine, or you're at the Vader turns anyway, so you can Overwhelming Barrage on Emperor Palpatine to do a ton more damage. It just, it feels pretty rude. So easy 3-ofs on all our high-cost things, because you can always pitch them to Kylo Ren. And you can reanimate them, and it works beautifully. I do want to mention, just in case I haven't yet, that sometimes Kylo Ren must give a unit +2/+0 if able. I have had games where I've had to give my opponent's unit +2/+0 in order to discard the Palpatine because I didn't expect to draw a return so soon, and I did draw one, and I wanted to get set up. And I've taken extra damage to the face because of it. That has definitely happened because I didn't want to give up the initiative, but I did want to pitch the card, and I knew they would want to attack again. You have to make tough decisions like that. This deck is going to be packed with tough decisions. I've seen people saying they've tried playing versions of this list and it didn't go well. Certainly could be the case. Certainly could be that your meta wasn't very good for it. It could be that the decisions were not optimal. It's a deck that is really hard to make those decisions on, but it has the advantage of just being able to absolutely spike games out of nowhere when you get the return combo going. Let's talk about our space stuff now a little bit. We have a little bit of respect for space, but not a ton. I could see if you've got a lot of space in your metagame, you could put things like Black Sun Starfighters in as well, just to make sure you can respect space a little bit more. But I've never had too much of a problem with it, especially with all the control pieces we have. The only one you can't really use is Force Choke on the space vehicles. But we have Kylo's TIE Silencer, which you're going to slam into every Kylo deck, period. It is a 2-cost 3/2 with action. If it's discarded from your hand or deck this phase, play it from your discard pile. You pitch it to Kylo, and then you can play it, which is great. Your opponent even might discard it from your hand. There's some raid decks going around that are just trying to pillage your hand, and it's kind of cool to have that. I've definitely had that happen once where I thought, well, Force Throw, huh? All right, too bad. I guess I'll just play the TIE Silencer now. But yeah, it's a 3/2. Its whole purpose is either to trade with something or just represent an obnoxious damage threat on the space side while you're controlling the rest of the game. It works really well for both, and it does the trick. Punishing One is in here. Punishing One is my favorite space unit to ECL or to Timely Intervention into play. As a 3/4 for 3, its stats are kind of out of control for space. I don't know why this thing is a 3/4. It's better than most space units at this cost. It just is. The stats are just really good on Punishing One, and it has an ability that says when an upgraded enemy unit's defeated, you can ready it, which has happened a number of times. It's not unreasonable for it to happen because experience counters exist. Shields don't, because the shield would be gone when the thing was defeated, unless in this deck, because all of our defeat sources is just dealing damage. I mean, yeah, that and other random upgrades, it does happen that you defeat them and you get to untap it and attack another thing. That's pretty cool, but it's just in here because its stats are great. You can ECL it into red 3s or into A-Wings, and it just eats them up. It just eats them, which is great. Imperial Interceptor is in here. I love the Interceptor. I've loved it since it was first spoiled for Spark of the Rebellion, and it is just so powerful, especially again with Timely Interventions and ECLs, where this can represent either 6 damage to a single space unit, or often taking out multiple space units when they're really trying to go hard in space. You can end their whole game effectively by just going, okay, ECL, Interceptor, kill that, attack that. They can suddenly run out of all their momentum, and then you have all the time in the world to build up to your Palpatines, clear the rest of their stuff, and call it a day. Interceptor rules. It's a great card. We have 2 copies of Force Lighting in here. I started running this because of the early Crate Dragon nonsense people were playing, but I have found that this has had so many good plays in this deck because Force units are so easy to have in play for this deck. Kylo Ren being an early deploy Force unit is huge. Fifth Brother existing, and then Kylo Ren, Darth Vader, and Palpatine in the deck as well. It is not hard to stick a Force Lightning that you can dump a ton of resources into to take things out. And it has so many uses, from things like Crate Dragon, it being the optimal answer to Crate Dragon, to Lurking TIE Phantom as well, optimal answer to that. And then it just kills anything you need it to. At the point of the game where your opponent's playing things like Reinforcement Walkers or Devastators or whatever, Force Lightning is completely playable and won't even take your whole turn to kill anything, and randomly gets rid of cool abilities that you really didn't want to deal with anyway. Things like a Ruthless Raider, like you don't want to take that damage? Sure, Force Lightning it. It works. I still have it at 2 because I do resource it a lot because it is sort of specific for the setup, but it has been way better than I expected to be a lot of the time. It has been very, very good, and I've not regretted playing with the deck. I've definitely not regretted playing Timely Intervention. This card is cracked as hell. I think this card is an easy 3 of. Currently, I just bought a few Hyperspace Foils. Currently, I bought Hyperspace Foils of Timely for $2 a piece, so maybe hop on that if you haven't yet. I think Timely Intervention is my favorite card to see in my opening hand because I know exactly what I'm resourcing that turn. I'm not giving anything up to do it. The cost of 2 is no big deal for the plays that you get with it. From the early plays to Incinerator Trooper and Fifth Brother and Dark Trooper, to the late game plays like using Timely to play Kylo Ren or Palpatine for some insane damage. I don't often go to 10 resources, but I have. When I draw more Timelies, I go higher in resources for sure. Timely just really, really does it all. It really gives you so many more options, and like I mentioned earlier, we don't just have one ambush that we can do every game now. Our opponents do not know how many ambushes we're going to have, and just breaking out a Kylo Ren late in the game to take care of the huge control threat that they just dropped is totally, what actually allows this deck to compete with other even like mono blue or blue-green control decks. Force Choke, I think, is a mandatory play in red decks that are trying to do anything on the board right now. Force Choke takes out Sabine before the Darksaber can drop, and any number of other insane threats it can deal with. It is the thing that will deal with anything that isn't a ship that you have a problem with until you get to the point where you can ECL in Rook or Kylo Ren that can deal with the rest of them, or Vader, or return Palpatine. It draws them a card and we don't care. All we're trying to do in this deck is keep them from getting any momentum, because our late game will destroy theirs. Our late game will be so much better than theirs. They have to deal with up to potentially 6 Palpatines, and there are decks that can do that. There are Palpatine decks that can get the win on you sometimes, but not a ton of decks can deal with that many, especially aggro decks. We're happy to force choke them, because by the time they're just drawing like 2 and 3 drops, and we're going to get to the stage of the game where we're just going to play Palpatine whiteboard, play Overwhelming Barrage whiteboard. It doesn't matter anymore. So happy to play Force Choke at 3, and the fact that it only costs 1 when you have a Force unit in play has been really clutch, like I mentioned earlier, for those turn 3 plays where you're trying to maximize your resources. It has come up more often than you'd think because of Kylo Ren's ability to flip, so it's awesome. Overwhelming Barrage. If you can't draw any of your space units, you better hope you draw an Overwhelming Barrage, because it's the one other answer you really have to space until you get to Palpatine. It is an insane card. Obviously, though, it's one you try to hold on to as much as possible. I'll tell you, resourcing this deck can be really difficult, too, if I didn't mention that. Knowing exactly what to resource when you have things you want to discard, things you want to hold, things you want to have early, it can be really difficult. And you will definitely, I think, need a few games, potentially, to explore that and feel out what you're supposed to resource and not, which is why I love Timely so much, because it's it makes the decision easy. But Overwhelming Barrage is often one you do want to hold on to. I have resourced it, though, because I'm kind of a heathen. I have resourced it, my only copy before. Depends on the deck, though. But Overwhelming Barrage is just insane. It is what buys you. It's the thing you play on turn 4 to get you to turn 5 so you can Palpatine's return. It will clear the board with a lot of things. Overwhelming is so cool in here because Kylo can pump something's power. So if you can get to the stage of the game where you have something, for example, you have a space unit in play, the opponent's going all ground, or you have a ground unit, your opponent's going all space, you can pretty safely pump the unit with Kylo Ren, and they will not necessarily have an easy answer, or definitely won't have an answer to it, and then use your Overwhelming Barrage to get up to a +4/+2 on that unit, which is usually enough to totally clear anything they're dealing with. Sequencing is tough because that takes time to do. It takes an action to pump with Kylo Ren, so it's not something you want to, like, you know, just tunnel vision in on, but it's an option, and it's important that it is an option. It's what makes this deck a little more versatile than people think. But yeah, card's insane, obviously. And Palpatine's return, finally. I talked about it earlier, but this is for reanimating your big Force units that you're going to set up with your discard. I never reanimate anything but those. Out of the sideboard, there's some things you can reanimate, but you don't want to waste it on reanimating a Phase 3 Dark Trooper. I guess I could see you doing it on a Rook, maybe, if you really, really needed the Rook. But usually Kylo Ren is going to be Rook, but better in those situations at that stage of the game, or Palpatine's going to be way better. So, yeah, this is, I think of all the cards in the deck, Palpatine's Return is the one card that you only will resource this if you already have one copy in your hand. But if you have the copy, you really want to shoot the moon, right? You want to go for shooting the moon. You want to hold on to it, make sure you can draw another. There are plenty of high cost, even if you have to reanimate Darth Vader, that's totally fine. That's usually still really, really good to do on turn 5. So it's usually pretty worth. But yeah, it's so much fun. I love this card. Finally, I have 3 more slots, and I have 3 upgrades in the slots, and I'm going to tell you right now, these slots are definitely the most flexible in the deck. You can kind of do whatever you want with these. I have liked these cards as one-ofs because they've been kind of cheeky answers to random things, but you can hone these slots in for whatever you need to deal with a little bit more. I'll talk through those real quick, though. Legal Authority, I think this card is underrated. Of all the capture cards, I'm not super hot on capture, but of all the capture cards, this is the one that actually makes it harder for your thing to die after they've captured something. So this is randomly like the answer to whatever. And the fact that Kylo Ren, again, can pump the power so that it's easier to capture other units with it that you might not have been able to otherwise, I think is really, really cool. The important thing to note about this too, again, is that this captures across arenas. It captures any enemy non-leader unit with less power than it. It doesn't have to be in the same arena. So you can use this to like pump up your punishing one and then capture something with 5 cost or 5 power or less. And then it makes the punishing one then a 3/6, which is really sweet. So it's solid. It's a solid answer. Ultimately, yeah, you're opponent's probably going to get the thing it captured back at some point, but the idea is that if you're using this on turn 3, 4, 5 to just kind of tempo them out of something, then by the time they get it back, well, you're going to play Palpatine or you're going to play Vader, and then you can deal with the problem. It won't be a big deal anymore. So the tempo is totally fine. Randomly, they'll be like, I finally got my 1 space unit, and then you just capture it, and then you keep going ham on them. So it works really well in those scenarios. Fallen Lightsaber is sometimes a really sick play on Kylo Ren on the turn you flip him. Turn 3, flip Kylo Ren. If the opponent has no serious threats, you put Fallen Lightsaber on him, and now Kylo Ren is a serious threat. Usually he can start attacking for 5 or 6 or 7 at that point, including pinging the board. But the big thing is he can just start trading with whatever he wants to. He can just clock the opponent for a ton of damage, put them on the serious back foot, so they're going to try to respond to you, and then you just answer anything they play. It randomly works really well. Otherwise, it's resource fodder a lot of the time. You just have it in there for those off scenarios where it ends up being really sweet. And then Traitorous. You know, Traitorous is another card we know very well. In some matchups, it's extremely good. In other matchups, you just resource it right away. Totally a thing you can side out if it's not very useful. Or you can side into more Traitorous if you like them, or you could put more in the main board if you like them. Yeah, it just totally depends on the deck, but I really, really want to keep 1 copy in the deck just to be able to deal with those random scenarios where it like swipes their Sentinel from them and then attacks their other Sentinel. And, you know, it has really powerful plays it does sometimes. So it is totally worth having the 1 copy in there. So that is the list. That's the core list that I have developed. Again, no ramp. I think ramp is not worth it because you just want to be clearing the board instead. Basically, every action you want to take with this deck, you want to be clearing something off the board until you get to the late game. And, well, actually, you still want to be doing that then. You do not attack your opponent's base with this deck until their board is totally clear. I probably should have said that right away, but that is my biggest tip for you. If you were spending your turns attacking your opponent's base instead of stuff they have in play, you're doing something wrong. You need to just be spending every action dealing with stuff in the early game, prevent the opponent from getting any momentum, get to the late game, and then establish complete control, return Palpatine, and call it a game at that point. So to help you with that, of course, we have a few sideboard options. Let's look at a few of those. Now, as usual in these deck profiles, I never give you an exact sideboard because I think your sideboard should be dependent on your local metagame or the metagame of whatever tournament you're going into. But here's some cards that I've been toying with in sideboard that you can totally consider. Cobb Vanth. I don't think people are playing this guy quite enough, but Cobb Vanth is a really cool unit against aggro decks. You can totally ECL this dude in, trade with something, and then very likely get something else. We have 9 2-drops in the deck. Out of 10 cards in a deck that is going to be around around 43 cards, 41, 43 cards at that point. You have a pretty good shot at seeing a 2-drop within those. And then you can get another free 2-drop out of it, which is pretty cool. The whole purpose of him here is just to accrue extra value against aggro decks to make sure you keep putting threats on the board so you can keep up with whatever they're doing. When you deploy Incinerator Troopers, that then can just trade for free with your opponent's stuff. That does feel pretty powerful. So I like him in there. If the opponent has a really fast aggro deck and it's just going a little too fast for you, throw him in. Black Sun Starfighter, same thing, but in space. If they have too many A-Wings, slap this guy in. It'll help. I have the 3rd Force Lightning in here. That's something that I don't think I'm ever going to take out of the sideboard. I want to have the 3rd Force Lightning in because sometimes you have to make sure you see it. You have to make sure you see the Force Lightnings. So you put that 3rd one in to deal with stuff. It can answer just a lot of random threats, other mid-rangey decks or aggro decks or anything. It's good. Architens. Okay, so Architens is a card that I finally decided that I was okay with. I wasn't sure about this card for a long time, but the reason it's in here, it says versus home 1. I found that the control decks that drop home 1 can be a lot harder to get through. So like a Lukish control deck that's going to end the game with a home 1 or something. I don't like that because home 1 puts more stuff in play, which is sort of like trying to outvalue you, and then sets your opponent up with a whole bunch of restore also, which can just sort of like buy them too much time and is still a gigantic thing in space. And as you saw, we don't have a lot of answers to big things in space. So I've enjoyed these Architens in the sideboard because if my opponent's going to try and go late with home 1s, I'm going to bring in Architens. I'm going to ambush their home 1. It kills it perfectly and then still lives with 1 health and then also gives you a free resource afterwards for whatever that's worth. So yeah, it's pretty sweet for dealing with major units, capital ships in space in the late game. And then here's another option, Reinforcement Walker. If you feel like you need to shore up certain control matchups in your metagame or certain mid-range matchups with this, it is something you can reanimate, keep in mind, but you only get the 6 cost reduction on it. But that said, just being able to bring it back out again is a way to accrue a lot of extra value against your opponent. So it is certainly a sweet card to bring in. You could do something like replace Kylo's if you feel like the Kylo's not very useful based on the leader they're playing or something. Although I wouldn't do that against like a Vader deck or something because Kylo kills Vader, which is awesome. But there are a lot of situations where Reinforcement Walker can do a lot for you, especially the fact that this deck has no ability to regain any health on the base, and Reinforcement Walker gives you a way to do that, which is very worth it too. So it's a great card to put in the sideboard. Any mix of these cards I think will make a decent sideboard. Also things like Extra Traitorous or anything else you feel like would be useful in your metagame, I think those are awesome, but those are some of the sideboard options that I have been playing with. So okay, this is my longest deck profile ever. I hope it remains my longest deck profile ever. I felt like I had a lot that I had to say about these because a lot of people I think have underrated Kylo's ability to play for this, but I hope after seeing this list, you have an idea of how this deck can work and how Kylo can work as a control leader. What I would love to hear from you guys is if you do try this deck, or if you've tried a similar version, what are your thoughts down below? How is your deck different? Has your deck worked? Or did you try this? Did it work for you or did it not? Do you have any questions about, am I insane? Am I just actually out of my mind trying to play a control deck with a 4-drop leader that sometimes drops as literally a 1/4? Maybe. Like, I'm not ruling that out either. However, the results have really bored out pretty well for me. So I think this deck is extremely fun, extremely powerful, and I can't get enough of it, to the point where I'm now chasing down hyperfoils. And as you saw in the intro, of course, I have my showcase Kylo Ren as well. I adore this deck. I hope you guys think it's at least interesting. Let me know your thoughts about it in the comments down below. Hope I didn't bore you to death. If you made it here, props to you. Thanks for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you guys in the next one.